Hello, my name is Clark Nash and I'm a British writer and filmmaker. As you might be able to tell, I'm not normally associated with documentaries, but that's what I'm here to explain. It all started about 6 months ago, when I was trying to write something a little different from my usual style, when I had the idea of writing about
positive for HIV.
HIV.
So, like any good writer, I began to research the topic and was propelled into a world of fear, panic, and a plague that threatened to destroy the modern world.
Epidemic. Yet you rarely hear a thing about it. At first, it seemed to strike only one segment of the population.
I watched documentaries, read news articles, and much more. But I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted to learn more from real people. So I decided to bring a camera along for the ride.
From here on in, I shoot without a script. See if anything comes of it instead of my old shit.
After asking around some of my peers, I was put in contact with a man by the name of Jack, a 32-year-old musician and conductor from Yorkshire who is living with HIV. So, after a few brief emails and a phone call, I packed up my gear, hopped on a train and travelled halfway across the country to talk to him.
As we speak, just 6.5 years ago or so, it was in the autumn of 2010, 20th of November to be precise. No one ever forgets. I mean, it was unexpected news at the time. I'd just moved back to London in order to concentrate on developing my career further, and it came about as the result of a routine test. It wasn't expected. It was quite a big piece of news, and at the time I felt I dealt with it quite well, simply because everything else, namely life, and where I was living, and various aspects of my working career, were all up in the air as well. So it was just another big thing to have to juggle. I mean, it's certainly very true that, and this is something I've found through sharing experiences with friends also diagnosed with HIV. Dealing with your own diagnosis is a downside easier than sort of helping other people to deal with your own diagnosis. It's quite strange, and it sort of becomes a two-way caring process in a way. The difficulty for me was that because of certain clerical anomalies, for want of a better word, and because of that there was quite a long period of what I can just describe as limbo. I did have a couple of friends that I could speak to during that time, but it was only a couple of friends who I felt I could share it with, simply because I didn't feel that I could be absolutely certain of this, and it's quite a big thing to have to go and tell people only to then retract it later, although that was exactly what has actually happened to me. Later on, as I told more of my friends, I've never had anything less than a supportive reaction, and those friends that didn't understand where I was coming from were open to hearing what I had to say and asked the right sort of questions. With family it was slightly more difficult. My mum has now retired, but during her career as a nurse was very much aware in the late 80s, early 90s of how HIV was impacting on patients right across the country, and particularly in her role as a district nurse, she was basically providing end-of-life care to patients with all sorts of conditions, but yes, including HIV patients who developed AIDS. Whilst she took an interest in that, she was always very interested in developments in medicine. There's no doubt that it coloured her perception of it to see, patients who were terminal with AIDS-defining illnesses, as we now call them. And quite apart from any conversations surrounding HIV, some of our earliest conversations during my teens when I was coming out, she'd made it clear that that was the thought, that I might be at risk of HIV was something that she found very difficult. And whilst I have since told her, it certainly became a factor in having to choose very carefully the timing of that. What I can basically describe as, well, its brand name is Triamec, and that's a medication that comprises of 3 drugs in one pill, and that's one a day. Not particularly dependent on whether it's taken with or without food, or at any particular time of day. There aren't any immediate side effects after each dose. There aren't any which would have an impact on whether I'm able to function normally, whether awake or asleep. Personally, I tend to suffer from nausea in the mornings, and these days I'm just not sure if that's because I've made the mistake of switching on the news or not. Any human could catch HIV. There are certain sections of society that, either for historical or social reasons, are more susceptible to catching HIV, or to whom, amongst whom the proportion of people with HIV is noticeably higher. But there are no hard and fast rules.
After having spent some time with Jack, I felt I'd begun to understand what life with HIV was like, and the biggest thing was that I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him. This is because, despite everything, he didn't once seem sorry for himself, and had such a positive outlook, I couldn't go against that. However, I still needed more information. I needed to know more about the scientific facts, something that by his own admission Jack couldn't provide. Eventually, I made contact with a Dr. Tristan Barber, who specialised in HIV and worked not far from where I lived, so I made an appointment.
Yes, so my name is Tristan Barber. I'm a consultant doctor in HIV and sexual health, currently working at Chelsea and Westminster. I have HIV clinics in 2 of our sites, one at our Dean Street site in Soho and one in our main HIV clinic here at Chelsea and Westminster, the Cobler Clinic. So HIV is a virus. It's a retrovirus that infects humans And it's a clever virus because it actually targets your immune system, so it targets specifically your helper white blood cells that are also called CD4 cells. And these are cells that coordinate your immune response to various infections. And HIV infects those cells, and it can hide in those cells because your immune system doesn't like fighting itself. And whilst it's in those cells, it can actually cause them to be killed. So you can lose numbers of those immune cells, and also HIV hides there so that your own immune system can't eradicate it. I think it is still the case that the predominant burden of HIV infection is borne by black Africans or by men who have sex with men in the UK. There is a small number of people that are injecting drug users and have been infected by that route, and that continues to be the case, but the majority has been sexual transmission in the two groups I previously mentioned. I think there has been a blurring around some of those infected groups, so that we have seen an increase in, for instance, a white heterosexual population with HIV, often with links to Eastern European countries, but not exclusively, and certainly in areas of high population density like urban centres such as London, you do see a bigger diversity in terms of those who are affected. But I do think the general population does still assume that it's predominantly an issue that affects gay men, or perhaps to a lesser degree black African populations. We know that there are certain biological reasons for perhaps an increased transmission in men who have sex with men, but it's not exclusively men who have sex with men. We know that some of the cells that HIV preferentially is attracted by or can preferentially enter are found in high numbers in the rectum. So people that have receptive anal sex, heterosexual and men who have sex with men, are certainly more at risk of HIV infection. There are a number of factors that are associated with HIV transmission. Number of partners, type of sex, your own biology, whether you're a man or a woman, or whether you're transgendered, what type of sex you're having, recreational drug use, having another sexually transmitted infection at the time of sex may increase your risk. So there's really a huge number of factors that can affect HIV transmission, and we can try and reduce the risk of transmission by looking at each of these different factors. You are what we call undetectable, which means you're still HIV positive, but if we take some of your blood, we can't find virus in that blood. And the level we cut that off at really depends on the machine that you're using, but we now use a cut-off of less than 20. So if you were undetectable for at least 6 months without another sexually transmitted infection, and you had unprotected sex, the risk of passing on your virus was virtually zero. People really would still like to be able to get rid of their virus completely. We know that it can be difficult to talk to people about having something that's lifelong, and I agree with you, having a virus that isn't curable but is manageable is a positive step. But really, if you speak to people that are infected, they will still say, of course, if I could have the virus eradicated and if I could have my virus completely cured, that would be amazing. I think there are repercussions from the AIDS era certainly still happening today. I think we have to, whilst acknowledging the horrendous impact there was on people who were affected by AIDS, who had limited access to medications and died as a consequence, some of the positive things that have come out of that time are that we are able to talk about sex, sexuality, gender in a far more open way, I think, as a country than we were able to before. I think because of the populations that were very affected by AIDS, we've seen this synergy in advocacy and fighting for access to treatment between groups of people that perhaps didn't get in the same room before. And so where there were things that we didn't talk about before AIDS, I think my impression is that there have been some really positive advances in being much more open about human sexuality, behaviour, risk-taking, the interplay of all of those things with faith and race and migration, and some of those things have led to a tremendous energy and passion in the HIV field that I think really we hope gets replicated in other disease areas that need that kind of enthusiasm and push and drive and energy, and that's one of the things I hope happens in more and more disease areas going forward. I would encourage people as part of their routine sexual health care to test regularly, to make sure they know their status. We would still encourage people to protect themselves and their sexual partners by asking about the combination prevention approaches that can help protect against HIV and also against other sexually transmitted infections. But we would also say, if you are worried about being tested positive for HIV, it's really a very treatable condition where we can give you a normal life expectancy and we can keep you well, provided we know about it.
Now, as we come to the end of this journey, I've learned much and certainly been changed by it. And as I stand here taking part in a celebration of the people most devastated by the HIV virus, I can't help but admire the optimism of those living with it. However, I still feel a sense of unease at how HIV often goes unnoticed amongst the general public, often dismissed as someone else's problem till it directly affects you. I hope this film, even though I've barely scratched the surface, will bring a little more awareness of the most ignored plague of modern times. I'll leave you with one last quote from Jack, for I'm unable to conjure any better words on the whole subject.
The thing to remember is that ultimately we're still human, and to treat each other as human beings on either side of that particular fence, and yeah, to reach out, talk to each other, and it can happen to anyone. So whilst I wouldn't want anyone to be fearful of it, it's probably not a bad idea that they bear that in mind as well. You never know what might happen to you in the future.